There are bonds we understand and there are bonds that defy reason. A child and his dog, one fragile, the other powerful, yet bound by a connection that feels written in the fabric of destiny. It began as a simple moment, a baby resting on the soft warmth of a giant black dog. Parents smiled, reassured by the loyalty and calmness of their gentle guardian. But then, just 20 minutes later, the peace of that afternoon shattered with a sound that froze their hearts. A scream so piercing, so desperate, it changed everything. This is not just the story of a child and a dog. It is the story of trust, of danger, of instincts that protect, and of the shocking truth that was uncovered in that single, terrifying moment. The dog was massive, a Great Dane whose sheer size could intimidate anyone at first glance. Yet to the family he was not a beast, he was a protector. From the moment the baby came home, the dog positioned himself as a silent sentinel. He lay by the crib, followed every feeding and slept at the nursery door.
He was more than a pet.
He was family. The parents often joked that their child didn't need a babysitter because the dog never let the baby out of sight. And so, on that warm afternoon when the baby nestled into the dog's sleek black fur and drifted into sleep, it felt natural, safe. The sight was tender, a picture of trust so deep that even silence seemed sacred. No one could have imagined that within minutes the air would be torn apart by screams. The sun poured gently through the curtains, painting golden patterns across the living room floor. The baby, wrapped in a soft green onesie, wriggled against the warmth of the enormous black dog. His tiny hands brushed against the short fur, and his breathing slowed until he drifted into a deep sleep. The parents, sitting nearby, exchanged a smile that only new parents understand, a smile of relief that for a moment their child was safe, calm, and happy. The father reached for his phone and snapped a picture, laughing quietly. "He looks safer there than anywhere else in the world," he whispered, and truly he did. The dog's steady chest rose and fell like a lullaby, and the baby's small body melted against it as if the dog were a living cradle. Minutes passed peacefully. The house seemed wrapped in a blanket of silence, broken only by the hum of the ceiling fan and the soft sighs of the child's dreams. For 20 minutes everything was perfect. Then, without warning, that perfection shattered. From the silence erupted a scream, sharp, desperate, filled with panic. It wasn't the dog. It wasn't the baby. It came from somewhere else outside, tearing through the air like an alarm. The parents froze, their blood running cold. Something had been disturbed. Something was wrong. It began faintly, almost like the distant cry of a bird. But within seconds it grew into something unmistakable, a scream so raw, so piercing that every nerve in the parents' bodies jolted awake. The father shot up from his chair, his heart pounding like a war drum. The mother clutched the edge of the couch, her instincts screaming louder than the sound itself. She turned her head toward the baby, terrified that the scream belonged to him. But the child was still there, asleep on the dog's side, his little face calm, untouched by fear. That realization made the sound even more horrifying, because it meant the cry wasn't coming from inside their home, it was coming from outside. The dog's ears twitched, his body stiffening beneath the baby. A low growl rumbled in his chest, deep and primal, the kind of sound that made even grown men uneasy. Slowly, his head lifted, his golden eyes narrowing at the window. The scream came again, closer, sharper, almost pleading. The mother whispered the father's name, her voice trembling. "What is that?" But he had no answer. The scream rose a third time, echoing through the neighborhood, cutting through walls and silence alike. It was a scream not of play or mischief. It was a scream of danger, of something terribly wrong. And in that moment the giant black dog stood up, careful not to disturb the baby, his body tense, ready, protective. Something outside their walls demanded his attention, and it was something no human wanted to face. The air inside the house grew heavy. as though the scream had stolen all the warmth from it. The parents barely moved, their eyes darting between their sleeping child and the shadowed window where the sound had come from. But the dog, oh, the dog, he moved with certainty. His growl deepened, vibrating through the floor, a primal warning that spoke louder than words ever could. His massive body shifted, careful not to disturb the infant still resting against him, yet every muscle was alive with tension. The baby stirred softly, his tiny fingers curling in the dog's fur, oblivious to the storm rising outside. The father, summoning his courage, took a cautious step toward the door. "Stay here," he whispered to his wife, though his voice shook with doubt. The scream had stopped now, leaving only an eerie silence. And in that silence, every sound inside the house seemed magnified. The tick of the clock, the creak of the floor, the faint hum of the fridge. Then, without warning, the dog moved. In a single fluid motion, he lifted the baby gently with his body, sliding him safely onto the rug before striding toward the door with a purpose that sent chills down the parents' spines. His head was low, his teeth barely exposed, his eyes locked on the unknown beyond the walls. The mother gasped, clutching the baby instinctively. She realized then what the father had not yet understood. The dog knew something they didn't. His instincts had awakened, primal and unrelenting, and whatever had caused that scream was not just outside, it was coming closer. The father's hand trembled as it hovered over the doorknob. For a moment, he hesitated, glancing back at his wife, who held their baby tightly against her chest, her wide eyes silently begging him not to open it. But before he could decide, the dog made the choice for him. With a sudden, forceful leap, the massive black body collided with the door, pushing it open with a crash that echoed through the house. Cold air rushed in, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of earth, sweat, and something metallic, blood. The father staggered back, stunned, while the dog bounded onto the porch, his growl now a thunderous warning that shook the silence of the neighborhood. And then they saw it, just beyond the yard, half hidden by the bushes, a figure stumbled into view. It was a man, his clothes torn, his face pale, clutching his side as though life itself was spilling from him.
His mouth opened again, and the scream returned, raw and jagged, filled with desperation. "Help, please!"
he cried, his voice cracking. The mother gasped, her arms tightening around the baby as her mind raced. Who was he? What had happened? And why did their loyal dog, usually so calm, seem ready to tear the night itself apart to protect them? The father moved forward cautiously, but the dog planted himself firmly between the stranger and the house, his entire body a shield of muscle and loyalty. The man collapsed to his knees, sobbing, reaching out with trembling hands. The scream had found its source, but its meaning remained hidden. And as the dog stood guard, teeth bared and eyes blazing, one truth became clear. This was not just a cry for help. This was the beginning of something much darker. The man collapsed onto the ground, gasping for air, his cries now breaking into ragged sobs. The father, torn between fear and compassion, inched forward, but the great black dog would not budge. He stood like a wall of living stone, every muscle rigid, growling so low it felt like thunder crawling across the earth. The man raised his bloodied hands, his voice trembling.
"Please, don't let me die out here." His words tumbled between coughs, each syllable soaked with pain.
The mother clutched the baby tighter, whispering a prayer under her breath, her eyes darting between the stranger and their protector. The father crouched cautiously, keeping a safe distance. "What happened to you?" he demanded, his voice firmer now, though his heart raced. The man's gaze flickered with desperation and terror, as though replaying a nightmare he could not escape. They came
"Out of nowhere," he stammered.
dark shapes, moving faster than anything human.
"I tried to run, but—" His sentence broke into a fit of coughing, blood staining his lips.
The dog snarled, his head whipping toward the tree line as though confirming the man's story. A heavy silence settled, broken only by the stranger's shallow breaths. "Please," he whispered again, his eyes glistening with tears.
I heard the baby. I followed the sound. I thought maybe someone could help me. His voice cracked,
Trembling like a child's, the father felt the weight of the decision pressing on him. Trust a broken man who might bring danger inside, or leave him to die on the porch while the night held its breath. And all the while, the black dog never moved, never blinked, his instincts screaming louder than words.
He knew something.
Something the humans could not yet see. Humans could not yet see. The air grew heavier, thick with dread, as though the night itself was holding its breath. The father was about to move closer to the wounded man when the black dog suddenly barked. One sharp, thunderous sound that shook the walls. His body shifted forward, his massive frame blocking the doorway completely, every hair along his back bristling. His growl returned, deeper, angrier, vibrating through the floorboards like the earth itself was warning them. The baby stirred in his mother's arms, whimpering softly, sensing the tension that even innocence could not ignore. The man on the ground flinched at the bark, his eyes widening with raw fear.
"They'll find me," he whispered hoarsely, his voice trembling.
"They always find me." His words trailed off into a silence that chilled the parents to the bone. The dog, however, was not silent. He lowered his head, his gaze fixed on the darkness beyond the tree line, his teeth glinting beneath the faint porch light. The father followed his stare and froze. Something was moving. At first it looked like shadows shifting between branches, but then he saw it. Eyes. Pairs of glowing eyes low to the ground, watching, circling, waiting. The stranger's trembling grew worse, his hands clawing at the porch as though he wanted to crawl inside.
You don't understand," he gasped.
"They hunt. They don't stop." The mother's breath caught in her throat as she pressed the baby closer, rocking him as though her arms alone could shield him from what was out there. The black dog stepped forward, his body a fortress, a silent oath that nothing, human or otherwise, would cross that threshold without facing him first. And in that moment, the family realized something terrifying. The scream had not been just a cry for help. It had been a warning. And whatever the man had brought to their doorstep was already here. The night outside no longer felt like night. It felt alive, breathing, watching. The glowing eyes in the tree line shifted, multiplying, circling closer with every heartbeat. The father's breath caught in his chest, his mind scrambling for logic.
Wolves? Stray dogs?
But no wolf pack moved like this. No ordinary beast stared with such unblinking hunger. The stranger on the porch tried to crawl toward the doorway, his voice cracking with panic.
"Please, let me in before it's too late."
But the dog would not move. He stood at the threshold like a soldier at the gates of a fortress, his teeth bared, his growl now a constant rumble of defiance. His eyes burned not with fear, but with a fury that dared the shadows to step forward. The mother clutched the baby tighter, whispering, "What are they?" The father couldn't answer. He reached instinctively for the fire poker beside the door, his hands shaking, the cold iron the only weapon between them and whatever hunted in the dark. The silence was broken by a sudden snap of twigs, a sound too heavy to be the wind, too precise to be chance. The stranger's eyes darted wildly.
"They've found me," he muttered, his voice hollow with despair.
Then it began, low snarls echoing from the darkness, a chorus of guttural sounds that sent chills crawling up their spines. Shapes moved just beyond the porch light, sleek, unnatural, too fast to follow. The father stepped back, his grip tightening on the poker, his pulse racing. The dog's growl grew louder, deeper, his body lowering into a stance of pure defiance. The baby whimpered again, and the mother hushed him, rocking desperately, her eyes filling with tears. The stranger's warning became prophecy. Whatever he had fled was here now, circling their home. And the family understood with terrifying clarity. They were no longer safe inside their walls. The shadows had come for them. The battle raged on the porch, each moment stretching into eternity. The black dog, wounded but unbroken, threw himself against the tide of shadows that poured from the forest. Every snap of his jaws was a shield. Every drop of blood he shed was a vow carved into the night. The father swung his iron poker, striking at the shapes that dared to lunge closer, while the mother clutched the child to her chest, whispering words of love as if her voice alone could ward off death. But it was the black dog who bore the weight of it all, his body a wall, his spirit a fire no darkness could extinguish. The creatures screamed in fury, but for every one that lunged he stood taller, fiercer, more unyielding. His growls rolled like thunder, shaking the courage of the beasts, reminding them that even monsters should fear loyalty forged in love.
At last, the shadows faltered.
One by one, the glowing eyes vanished into the trees, retreating, beaten not by numbers, but by the indomitable will of one protector. The porch was silent again, save for the ragged breath of the dog who now lay trembling, blood dripping into the wood. The boy stirred from his sleep, unaware of the nightmare he had been cradled through, and reached his small hand to rest on the dog's head. The black dog's eyes softened, his chest rising once, twice, before he let out a low sigh, peaceful, as though he had finally kept the promise he was born to fulfill. In that moment, the family understood. This was no ordinary animal. He had been guardian, warrior, and angel in one. Though his body was mortal, his love was eternal. The boy's tiny voice whispered, "Good dog," and the world seemed to hold its breath in reverence. True loyalty is not found in words, but in sacrifice. Love, when pure and unbreakable, has the power to stand against even the darkest shadows. The black dog's final act was more than protection. It was a reminder that courage born from love can silence fear, and that some bonds are so sacred, even death cannot erase their echo.